Welcome to When Not Yet Becomes Right Now, the podcast where we dive deep into the moments of transformation, the times when not yet shifts into right now and everything changes. I'm your host, Jen Ginty, and this podcast is all about those pivotal moments in our life journeys. You know the ones, when the hesitation fades, when we take that first step, even if it feels like a leap. It's in these moments that growth and healing begins. Each episode will explore stories of resilience, moments of clarity, and the sparks that ignite real change. From personal experiences to expert insights, we'll uncover how people navigate the complex journey we call life and come out stronger on the other side. Whether you're searching for that spark in your own life or just curious about how change unfolds for others, you're in the right place. We'll discuss the ups and downs, the breakthroughs and setbacks, and how to embrace the right now, even when it feels out of reach. Because sometimes the hardest part of the journey is realizing that the moment you've been waiting for has already arrived. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let's get started. Hello, this episode contains discussions of childhood trauma, sexual assault prevention, and mental health struggles, which may be sensitive for some listeners. Please take care while listening. Hello and welcome to When Not Yet Becomes Right Now. Today's guest is amazing. Timothy Wienecke is a licensed therapist, Army veteran, and host of the American Masculinity podcast. Tim specializes in helping men navigate mental health, trauma, and identity through grounded, practical conversations. His work centers on how cultural narratives around masculinity shape men's well-being and how we can build resilience, authentic leadership, and deeper relationships. From soldier to therapist, Tim's journey is powerful, and today he's here to share what not yet meant for him and how right now came to life. Welcome, Tim.
Well, that was an incredibly lovely and thoughtful introduction. However, we're going to make the soldiers mad. I was in the Air Force.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, you don't got to be sorry. But yes, slight difference. Better food, better barracks, you know.
Okay, good to know. So let's get into it. What is your origin story?
Well, so the going from the Air Force into human services thing, I think, is a bit of a jump that a lot of people are a little confused by. So I went into the Air Force later in life. I was 28 years old. For those of you who are old enough to remember, it was 2005. And out here in Denver, we had the crash early that everybody else had in 2008. So I went in and I was already kind of everybody's uncle, if that makes sense, right? I was about a decade older than the people I served with on average. And so people would look to me a little bit, right? Because I was a safe person to go to, because I wasn't a sergeant or anything just yet. But I was also old enough that people thought for some reason that 28 was wise. And when I got out into Korea for my first duty station, they do this thing in the military where when you show up at your first base, there's like a kind of a 2-week onboarding for the service, you know, where they're like, hey, welcome to the Air Force. Here's all the different things on base. Here's all the different stuff to do. Here's all the different, you know, things that you might need. And in one of those briefings, it was for the sexual assault prevention folks. And in my class, it was primarily police officers, like military police. And so this woman comes in to do the briefing, which at this point, everybody's had this briefing like once a month. You know, the Air Force is a really big organization. And so whenever there's a problem, that's kind of what they do, is they just do death by PowerPoint that you have to do and say that you knocked out every month or so. And so the sergeant comes in and she's doing the briefing, as we've all had ad nauseum. And particularly for the police officers, they have this briefing once a week, and it's the same PowerPoint that they always have. And one of the guys puts his hand up very brashly. You know, he was 19, seemed young. He's like, man, not for nothing, I get this briefing at least once a week. Is there any way we can have a different conversation about this? And in the Air Force, you don't do that. You know, you don't check a training sergeant. And she got very, very angry. And she kind of came at the room and said, you know, if you'd stop raping people, I could stop giving this effing briefing, sit down and shut up. And so it was a room full of men that she was training. I think there was maybe one or two other women in the room. But at that point, you felt the room get really like hostile, right? She basically just called every guy in the room a rapist. And, but we're all brand new, freshly minted airmen, and this is a sergeant. So everybody's like locked up and silent as she, and kind of angrily goes through the rest of her slides. And because of the silence, I had a few minutes, right, where I think my initial response, probably like all the guys in the room, was angry, right? Feeling kind of attacked, feeling like I was being called this thing. But because I had that time, I was able to kind of look at her and see her a little bit better. And so she looked tired. She looked a little disheveled, which in the military is a big deal. You look very crisp when you're in the military, particularly if you're someone that goes and gives briefings. And it made me more curious than angry as to what was going on that this woman was this angry. And so when the briefing was over, I took a look into it and found out that the base I was at the time had one of the highest occurrences of sexual assault in the Air Force. It was, and it's kind of because it's it's because it's a perpetrator's dreamland. Most people only show up to the post for a year. It's a heavy drinking culture. So in Korea, in the bases, there's a tradition where when somebody new gets to the unit, you sit them in a chair at the bar and you make them drink soju, which is the local liquor, until they can't get up.
Wow.
And so between everybody being new, it being a first term base, so new airmen can go there right at a training, and it being an 18 and up drinking culture, if someone wants to be a perpetrator, it's a fairly easy place to do so. But that made me want to do something about it. And that's when I volunteered and I became someone who you were allowed to report to. So in the military, if you're in uniform, the rule is you're a mandated reporter, right? So kind of like I'm as a clinician, if somebody comes in and tells me that some kids are being hurt somewhere, I have to go to social services. In the military, if somebody in your unit comes to you and says, I was assaulted, you have to go to your command and tell them. Unless you're an advocate. If you're an advocate, they can come to you and they can talk to you, and it doesn't have to escalate into anything official if you don't want it to. And so that's where I got my start and where I started hearing, the stories of how people get hurt and what happens, and started finding that I was able to hold that better than the technical work that I was doing, right? I was doing intelligence work, which, man, the recruiters really get you. They're like, man, your job is so cool. I don't even know what you do. Turns out secret isn't always interesting. But yeah, that's when I really kind of started to accept that my focus was going to be more on people than things, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the start of it.
I want to touch on that 19-year-old, like mm-hmm. That was the average age of the people who are coming in mm-hmm. to serve. My son turns 19 next month.
So fully formed adult, ready to go.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, this whole summer I've been on him. You need to be more responsible. You need to get ready for this and this. Mm-hmm. And, it's really difficult for me being on this end to see a 19-year-old in that position.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. I think 19 is a lot younger now than it was even 10 years ago.
Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, I think everything, I think that whole generation compared, like I'm 45, and compared to my generation, they do everything about 5 to 10 years later to include their first date. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we've just made the world a little too safe.
Little one learning to navigate their big emotions? Meet My Moody Monster, the pull-apart buddy to help kids understand and manage their feelings. With its fun, interactive design, Moody turns tough feelings into teachable moments, giving your child a playful way to express themselves. Whether it's after a rough day or when those big frustrations hit, Moody is there to lend a hand. Perfect for calming down or even just a cuddle, My Moody Monster helps your child communicate their emotions while learning healthy coping skills. Go to mymoodymonster.com to learn about Moody today. Sometimes, yeah, as a Gen Xer, My way of survival was getting a job.
Yeah.
It was, well, also I was living with an abuser. So
I
that
mean,
was,
that's an
yeah.
experience.
Yeah. So getting out of the house was the most important thing. So how
Mhm.
do I do that? I get a job.
Yeah.
And, my sons probably didn't really start working until they were about 18,
Yeah.
17, 18, whereas I was working at like 12.
Yeah, same.
So I think there is there's a big difference there. I don't know if it's for better or for worse. I think that there are some pros and some cons to that, in a sense that children get more of a childhood, in a
Yeah,
sense.
I think there's something to be proud of in that we've made the safest generation of children in human history,
Yeah.
but we've also made the most fragile generation in human history.
Mm, yeah.
Uh, I think we, I think the Xers and early millennials in particular, we were so kind of abandoned by our caregivers, even if it wasn't an
Mm.
abuse situation. We were the latchkey kids. Come home, make
Hmm.
yourself a sandwich, watch TV. Nobody's there for you.
Well, it was the first generation whose parents both had to work,
Yeah, and it's not gone well, I would say.
right? Right.
And so I think it's every parent tries to heal the wound they had for their children.
Mm. Yeah,
And so,
sometimes. I think there's, I'd say, I know I worked hard to do that myself,
mhm.
but I also see a lot of generational trauma that
Oh, sure.
continued through because they didn't understand it and didn't speak of
Yeah.
it. Now that we speak about it, it's become a little easier for us to understand we can make changes like that, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was like, I'm a childhood survivor as well. My home was really chaotic. And my mother in particular was the person who made the life painful.
Mm,
And I know her story now.
mm,
And she was a far better mother than her father was to her.
mm,
Right. And I think like there's kind of two perspectives that I hear clinicians talk about it in. And I think they're both valid depending on your story and what you need. Mine is most parents do the absolute best they can and absolutely love their children.
mm.
It's just that their best is kind of trash, depending, right?
Yeah.
You only know what you know. You only bring in what you're bringing. And like for my mom, she was 19 when she had me. She was a baby, like we were just talking about, right?
Yeah. My mom had her first child at 19 too.
Yeah. And so for me, it's been really healing to kind of have that grace from my mother. But I work with plenty of patients where that grace is destructive because it was weaponized against them for a lot of their life.
Mhm.
The person who hurt them would kind of play the victim card once they were old enough to be called out and say, oh, I did the best I can. You should love me anyway.
Yeah.
Which that's also not okay. It's not a child's job to take care of a parent.
Absolutely not. You're right.
Mm.
So, did you decide to go further into psychology while
Well,
you're
so that was a bit of a journey from there.
okay?
So I'm in victim services at this point in Korea. I'm helping people as things happen. It's complicated, right? Sexual assault is one of the more complicated crimes because everything in us, when it happens to us, is antithetical to getting evidence for a prosecution,
Mm,
right? So when that kind of thing happens, everybody it happens to, they want to like go wash. They want to pretend it didn't happen. They want to minimize it. And then over the course of a few days, they realize they can't and they try to go report, except now there's no evidence.
the evidence is gone.
And there's also, most of the time it's acquaintances, it's people that and it's in an environment where there's plenty of consensual sex happening between parties. And so even if the guy's willing to, well, usually the guy, right, can't happen the other way.
Hmm.
Even if they're willing to admit that it happened, they'll say it's consensual, right? And so that all gets very ugly.
Yes, and that need to wash away that shame,
Mm,
even though you weren't the perpetrator. The perpetrator should have that shame, but
yeah.
it falls on the victim.
Well, I think that's the hardest thing about interpersonal violence. When you get mugged by a stranger, it's scary and it's traumatizing, but it's not about you. When it's interpersonal like that and it's that intimate, particularly with the most physical of intimacies, it can feel like it taints you, that it's now changed you. a lot of it's just in how we frame it and the language we use around it, right? We don't say, like the language has changed a little bit, but it used to say, like a battered woman, right?
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden this happening now redefines their personhood as opposed to a woman who experienced, right? And I think that's why the survivor language has been so forthcoming and so useful for so many people, myself included. It's a lot easier to identify someone who survived something difficult as opposed to someone who is surviving something terrible.
Mm. And when I talk about my past, I talk about my diagnoses, I say I live with complex PTSD and depression because at some point in my life, I switched it from I survived.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that was an important switch for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the one I think that when I do training for other clinicians now, and I do trauma-informed care stuff, it's about making that transition. It's about making it part of your story because it's going to be part of your story. That this is a fundamental event in your life. And to pretend it's not doesn't really do anybody any favors. So from there, I went to England, and England was a bit more challenging because I was on a very small base and I was the only resource. There wasn't any kind of infrastructure for anybody going through those kinds of things. And because I was older, I kept getting handed, I like to say, responsibility without authority. Right? I wasn't a sergeant. I wasn't an officer. I didn't have the official backing, but, you got a college degree, you're old. You'll be able to handle it. And in big systems like that, having actual authority does matter, turns out. But while I was there, I got really lucky in that the Air Force was a bit out in front of sexual assault compared to the other branches. I think in part because we had more women than the other branches. We tend to be a little bit more corporate in our culture than the other branches. And so what happened to us is what happens to almost every organization when they start to take on a sexual assault problem, which is the minute there starts to be effective briefings on things, the minute it starts to be part of the culture that, hey, that's not okay, reporting skyrockets.
Makes sense.
But it looks really bad in the news. Right. And so the Air Force got in a lot of trouble. There were 2 drill sergeants that had been assaulting trainees, and there was a big scandal out at the Air Force Academy in the same year. I don't know if it's the same year, but they were really close together. And so that made the Air Force try to do something, which was great. They launched into a bystander intervention program. And so that's something that's just kind of common practice now. But back then we're talking about, 2010. And so they were ahead of most colleges in doing this program. And since I was in England and I was in a smaller base, I got to get trained on how to do the new training by the PhDs that developed it, which was really cool. Like just really smart, very passionate people. And one of them during the training for this pulled me aside for a lunch. And she was like, "Hey, what do you do?" And I was like, "Oh, I do intelligence stuff. It's whatever." And she's like, "Yeah, you're doing the wrong thing. You should be doing this kind of work." And the way the training changed was fundamental. We went from doing like a PowerPoint that just said, "Hey, did you know rape is bad? That you shouldn't do it. And if you do, these are the consequences for you." That doesn't really do anything. Anybody who's paying attention knows those things. So instead, what the bystander training does, and anybody who's been on a college campus in the last 10 years has probably experienced some kind of education like this, where sexual assault is a violent crime. 60% of all violent crimes happen in front of witnesses. And so the idea that we're going to teach women and men how to be safer in the world versus sexual assault has not worked, right? Women have been raised to think about the possibility since they were 4. There's really not much more education that's going to happen. And like, hey, I know you've been thinking about this for your whole life, but let me just tell you this one tip and it's going to make it all better, right? Mm-hmm. So instead, the conversation moves to how to notice when something might be happening, how to care enough to do something about it for somebody else, and then giving people ways to do things. And so when I was working with airmen, it was great because they were kind of hard to convince right? They're like, hey, it's none of my business. I don't know who that person is. If they're leaving the bar stumbling drunk, I leave the bar stumbling drunk. Why, I'm not going to get involved. And so convincing them to like get involved, to check, hey, it doesn't take much to ask somebody if they know each other. It doesn't take much to find her friend. But the Air Force guys, the minute that you convinced them that there was something to do, they're like, okay, I hit him. No, you're going to go to jail. Don't do that.
Oh my goodness.
No, don't do that. Talk to the bouncer, talk to the bartender, talk to their friends, have one of your female friends go check on her, right? Like you take them through all the different things to do. And then all of a sudden the barrier to action goes down because you have something you can think of to do, which for most people, we watch bad things happen in the world. And most people are pretty good people and they would like to do something, but in the moment, they don't know what to do. And so this lowers that bar to entry and it changes things pretty fundamentally. So I finished up my 5-year term in the Air Force and then got out and went to grad school for counseling. And I worked on the college campus's crisis center at that point. And I did the same kind of work, except with college students. And that was a very funny cultural transition.
I can imagine.
The folks on the college campus were much more likely to say, look, I'd love to do something, but I'm not getting punched in the face for a stranger. I was like, no, you don't have to get punched in the face. It's okay.
Total opposite, right? Total opposite of the airmen.
Yeah. Same solutions turns out, right? Go talk to the bouncer, go talk to her. And so I think all in, I did 6 or 7 years of violence prevention work and advocacy work. And I'm really happy to have transitioned into clinical work. Advocacy work gets really hard because you always see people on their worst day, right? When you're working a crisis line, everybody that calls in, it's one of the worst days of their life. And then you hand them off to resources and you never hear from them again. You don't know what happens. You don't know if they get better. You just get to hear them on that day. As a clinician, I get to hear the whole story sometimes, not always. People sometimes come in and leave, but for the most part, I get to see people's journey, and that refills the tank a lot more.
So you get out of the military and you start your own clinical. Did you become a psychologist?
So the program to become a licensed counselor was 3 years. And so during that 3 years, the first year I did most of my work with the crisis center. And then I transitioned over to working for the Veterans Services Center, and I built out a veterans transition program. And we went from like 2 people helping, 20 or so veterans that came into campus to I had a volunteer staff of 25, and of the 1,000 students that were starting as veterans, they all got paired with a mentor and had an orientation. And I built all that, and it was really wonderful. And I think it was really nice to kind of have a bit of an off ramp from the advocacy work to the clinical work, right? Because the problem with clinical work is I'm touching people one at a time. So helping societal change is more difficult. And sometimes you get a little bit, you feel siloed, right? I know the person in front of me's story. I know I'm helping them, and these problems are still widespread in the world, and there's only so much I can do. But it was really just powerful to the whole time be in people surfaces, right? Like helping people, helping things move. And so I did my internship at a pretty popular trauma clinic out here at the time. It was really competitive to get in, and learned how to help some of the most horrendously hurt people that you can imagine. To this day, I've been doing this almost 10 years now, and my most complicated cases still happened in that clinic because that's how our system works. We put the most at risk and the most at need in front of our most junior and most inexperienced. It's just how money works, unfortunately. But I learned a lot. I learned how to clean up things, how to help people, how to give some structure around things that need structure. And then after all that, I decided I never wanted a boss again. After the military and after working on college campuses and big organizations, don't get me wrong, like running your own practice, there's plenty of mistakes to be made, but at least they're mine and I get to clean them up.
Exactly. The entrepreneur's life.
Yeah. I do miss vacation days, though, if I'm being honest.
True, true. Yeah, they're few and far between when you are an entrepreneur.
Hmm. Yeah, but I'm very, very lucky. I work primarily with men now, and so career counseling is a big part of my work. Every guy in America, the first question they get asked anywhere they go is, "What do you do for a living?" Right? It's an important distinction and question, and it's really hard because most people don't get to find work that matters to them.
Mm.
And I think it really hurt the Xers and early millennials because that's what everybody told us to do, right?
Yeah,
The myth was, go find what you love and then do that for a living and you'll never work a day in your life, which is a total nonsense.
absolutely.
It means I'm going to work and like basically almost kill myself working so hard because I love this. Oh wait, that didn't work out at all.
I felt that way about my first 10 years of
Mm-hmm.
working, because I did learn pretty soon that I didn't like having a boss.
Yeah.
But the Gen Xers, like, a 9 to 5 is the correct way to live your life. And the same was with my mother. My mother does not believe that I have a job.
Never mind that you make your mortgage just fine.
Right,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. But it's very interesting how we've, again, another change in generations where people are now deciding that they are going to do what makes them happy.
Well, what I like about the young people I work with is they're a lot better at accepting the balance of work and passion
Mm,
than we were raised with. And a lot of the times for the guys I work with, it's Denver's a big tech town. I work a lot with tech guys. Most of those guys aren't passionate about what they're doing. They're just figured out a way to make money with something they're good at.
mm,
And by acknowledging that that's not going to be their passion, they end up being so much better about work boundaries. They find a job that pays them enough, that respects their time enough, that they can go do the volunteering. They can go coach their kids' sports team. They can go be the dad they want to be. They can go work for that nonprofit on the side if they want to, but their mortgage is covered, their rent is covered. And it's feeling so much more whole to me as a society. It takes the pressure off of your passion having to be your work. Because I think for a lot of people, their passions, once it becomes work, it kills the passion.
yeah. I think passion and purpose are two different things.
That's true too. It's true
You
too.
know, when I realized what my purpose was, when I
Mm.
created my Moody Monster, I created
Mhm.
this doll that you can rip apart, get all your
Yeah.
frustrations out on. I realized that it was my purpose to get them out into the world, to share them
Mm.
with the world. And it also can be my passion, but I can also have other passions that I want
Yeah.
to do,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm. Yeah. I think everybody finds their thing if they find some happiness, right? They find some purpose and they find some passion. I think where a more fulfilling life happens is when we recognize that those change over time too. Like on the other end of the spectrum, I get these guys that used to love what they do, and now it's crushing them, and they just feel so hopeless. Well, I found my thing, and now it's awful.
Mm.
No?
Yeah, I've spoken with people before about how they had the mentality of it's better to look good than to feel good.
Mm,
And, it doesn't matter if you love your job, you're making excellent money, you're taking care of yourself, but there's still an emptiness.
well, and I'm actually working on a book on this right now. So if the
Oh,
idea is half baked, forgive me. But it's something that other people have written about as well. The idea of a provider for
mhm,
men has really hurt us overall. Not because men shouldn't provide, right? Like if you're talking about a family unit and someone providing, that's great. But we made it the only rule. And we basically said, hey, be a provider. We don't need dad,
mm,
right? Go work, come home, go in your study and shut the door unless the kids need a spanking. Or go to work, get divorced, and then don't have custody and don't see your kids,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so even now, guys still have that story of like, if I'm not a provider, I'm not a man. And so it's not even as much, look good over feel good. It's this myth that I'm supposed to sacrifice my happiness to be a provider. I'm supposed to give that up. That's what a man does. And we don't have to. We can find balance. We can find a way to be a provider and dad. Or a lot of women have more earning potential than a lot of guys right now.
Yeah,
You
there
know?
should be an equality to it.
Well, that was the dream of feminism, right? Is that everybody
Hmm.
gets to choose. And
Hmm.
for better or worse, right? Women now have the choice to be everything, which means you all have to be everything, or everybody judges you for everything, which is not the best. And I
Yeah,
think
that's the
this,
pressure.
oh, it's awful. It's ridiculous. And now feel like this is their first real generation of guys where when a couple has a kid, there's an actual discussion over who stays home.
Mm.
And that's still not guaranteed, but it's starting to happen.
And that's progress.
I think so.
Yeah.
There's a guy named Richard Reeves. He put out a book called Of Boys and Men, Why They're Struggling and What to Do About It. And he advocates for the idea of, if it's a two working household, of a mutual slowdown. And that's what I try to guide my patients towards is, you can push one thing in your life at a time. And your kids, 95% of the time you spend with them in their entire lifetime happens before they're 18. And so taking a career pause while your kids are little, I'm not saying you got to like stop working entirely, but maybe hold to that 40-hour week. Don't chase the promotion.
Yeah.
Right.
Women are supposed to be the ones who write down the history of their children.
Mm-hmm.
And many times the fathers don't get the chance to be a part of that.
Yeah. It's been one of my favorite things about the work. I never expected our dad's generation to show up for therapy. Like the John Wayne guys, those guys weren't going to come to therapy, right? They do. Turns out I get a few. And what I love about working with the ones that have grandkids is how healing that is for them. Because most of them, under their, like, in the nougat of the outer, like, I'm a provider, I did good, right? They missed it. And they know they missed something. And so by being around and letting down the idea that they're not supposed to like the kids, letting down the idea that it's not okay for a grown man to like get on the floor and play with a 3-year-old, right? All of a sudden, that's where the fulfillment comes for them later in life. They really struggle once they lose their jobs. Like retirement, the way that boomers framed out retirement was terrible, which is the end of labor. Not the end of labor for money, right? I think as humans, but men in particular, we need labor. We need to feel like we're doing something that's contributing to the wellness of the people we care about, right? And so since for so long, our only avenue to that was professional, once these guys lose that, they were listless, they were depressed, they were angry, they were suicidal. And so by convincing them that their labor can be, you can be the afternoon care for the grandkid. You can be the person that does these things. You can be the wisdom in your family, and that has value. It's really healing for so many people.
I can imagine. And I've witnessed many times my friends will say my parents stopped working and now they do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And the plasticity of their brain
Just goes away.
Yeah. And how sad that can be to watch as well as it happening to you. Because when we look at our parents, we're like, they're the ones who did the things. They got the things done. And then to watch them kind of mentally decay.
Oh, a little bit. And it's funny, the exer grandparents that I work with, I think have the hardest time. Because they're like, look, I raised me, I raised you. Can I be done for some portion of my life?
That could be valid.
Right. And I think where we get lost. So America is the most individualistic culture on the planet. And that has a lot of good things to it, right? We tend to be better at business than people. We made it to the moon. Our Star Spangled Banner is like the only trash talking national anthem in the world, which I think is amazing. Right. We're better than you. We're better than you. It's ridiculous, but it's awesome. On the flip side of that, though, we undervalue community tragically. And I think that's where like the Xers got so lost, right? They were so like used to being alone, right? We got so used to being in these little isolated bubbles that we feel safe in them.
Mhm.
But like we were talking about with your son, right? Safety is not always where growth lives.
Right. And community always comes up for me
Mm-hmm.
in these talks. And I hated community when I was younger.
Yeah,
If I
because it
had to
was
go
used to
to
hurt you.
Right. If I had to go to group therapy, it was the worst thing in the world. All I wanted to do was leave and get a cigarette and,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
just and sit outside. And we were forced to sit together and talk about our problems.
Mm-hmm.
But now, as an adult, when I finally realized that I had to get on this journey, community became such a big thing for me
Mm.
because I did realize that there are others out there who have gone through similar situations and have similar diagnoses, or that they understand.
Yeah, I think there's a powerful place for being around people you identify with. I think though we prioritize that too much. Like, have you ever heard of the book Bowling Alone? It was written in the 80s.
I've heard of it. I don't know much about it though.
It's a good book, and the man who wrote it basically predicted Trump,
Oh,
and not Trump specifically, but this situation.
okay.
And the reason why it's called Bowling Alone is because up through the 70s, bowling was a league thing. Bowling was like, it was super popular. Every middle class family played it, and you played with your neighbors. So if you were a liberal professor and your neighbor was a construction worker, you played on the bowling league together. You sat in a literal circle one night a week and bullshitted over beer, right? And then in the 80s, for some reason, all of a sudden people started bowling by themselves and the leagues kind of went away. And everybody kind of retreated into their homes, into these silos. And it makes us forget that community doesn't mean you have to like everybody that's there. Community doesn't mean you have to agree with everybody that's there. All
Very true.
community means is that we're moving towards something similar, whether that's, we both work at the food bank. I'm an agnostic guy. Church makes me uncomfortable for a lot of reasons. But when I go volunteer at the food bank, you better believe that like one of the guys I really like there is Mormon and incredibly involved in his church. Right? And we have a great time.
Yeah, I think that's really important what you touched on, that we don't always have to be in cahoots with everyone that could
Yeah.
be in our community.
Yeah.
When you have tight friend circles,
Mm-hmm.
you tend to agree
Yeah.
on pretty much everything. Like my friends that I had all the way from college,
Mm-hmm.
like we've been together 30 years.
Oh, that's lovely. I'm
And
so glad you have them.
yeah, and one of them's getting married again, and we're all going to be walking down the aisle as bridesmaids again.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah, exactly. But that group is insular.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Yeah.
also a bigger community that people can get themselves involved in and feel good about it.
Yeah. It's interesting. Someone pointed this out, and there's good data behind it. I'm a really liberal guy, right?
Me too.
But I often dislike how liberals treat people who make mistakes, right?
Mm.
Like with liberals, and with the idea of all the online chat rooms for the younger people, like the Discords and such, they're great. And I think we need to kind of balance this out where, particularly those of us were hurt so badly, like you and me, we needed some space with people that understood before we were ready to re-enter a larger community, right?
Yeah.
But I think now they don't leave. They get into the little community of people that are exactly like them, that believe all the same things they do. And then anytime anybody disagrees or makes a big enough mistake, they're out and they're completely ostracized.
That's the rub.
And with conservatives, they've got their things that they're very upset about, and they've got their things that they will ostracize you from the group for, but you can always come back. The redemption arc for Christianity is huge, right? And don't get me wrong, you might not want to go back with the stuff they want you to, sign on for, but I wish we had a little bit more of that in liberal circles where, hey, I made a mistake. I'm learning. Like if I held the same beliefs now that I did at 20, I would be a terrible human being.
Oh, yeah. Again, going back to that age, we're not adults.
Well, it's just times change, right? Like, I got an allyship award from the LGBT office on my college campus because I helped them make the office, right? And this was, I think, 2001. I'd never met a trans person, right? I had no like I had no concept of what that was like. Back then you couldn't be bi,
Mm,
right? If you were bi, people were very uncomfortable, like pick a side kind of stuff, right?
yeah. Ugh.
And now the idea that someone would be ostracized by who they're attracted to is kind of ridiculous in most circles. Like even in conservative circles, they're not as concerned about whether you're gay or lesbian anymore. They've got a long way to come on trans stuff, but we had all those, what was it, like in the 2000s, all those cranky old white Republican senators who were like, well, I had this cousin and it was a wedding and it was a beautiful wedding. I guess it's okay.
I
Right.
guess it's okay. If a relative did it, then maybe it's okay, I guess.
Well, and so I think like we need to accept that there's some truth to that, right? People are uncomfortable stepping outside of their normal. And it's how we end up hurting ourselves. Every patient I work with, when they come in the pain they're in, their pain is normal. And we will almost always default to knowing what happens next than taking a risk for hope. And so it takes outside exposure. It takes someone that matters to you experiencing something for it to become real in your world. And I'm not like, I wish more people had more empathy, and just because someone said, hey, it's hurting me, can we do something different, would be enough. I sincerely wish that was why we did things. But it's genuinely not. It's usually because you finally witness something. Like I've had this kind of situation happen to me 5 times in my life now, where I held a wrong belief. So I grew up outside of DC, and my school was really diverse, and I got beaten for being a white kid, and I mean properly beaten, like bruised or cracked ribs beaten. And my mom's family was Southern and were very, very like overt racists. And so my takeaway from that at 19 was racism is nonsense. It's rich people trying to get poor people to hurt each other, which is also true, right? That's why it's like largely enforced. But I was a loud, brash, white 19-year-old who's used to filling space, right? So I'd argue about it in classes. I'd be in sociology classes and arguing about the issue of racism and what it is. And these very patient professors and nice people dealt with me being very like expressive of that. And then one day I was in line for a coffee at Starbucks, and I was wearing my poor kid outfit. Like I had moved in with a family to go to college that were fairly well off, but I grew up pretty poor. And so I still dressed like my identity was still poor, right? And so I like had my cut off jeans. I looked like I could rob the place, right? I'm in a Starbucks, but I don't look like I belong in a Starbucks in 2000. And in front of me, there's a petite, incredibly well-dressed, like a business suit woman who's Black. And the barista, who was this very sweet, kind of, 20-something college student working at a Starbucks, looked right over her at me and asked me if what I wanted, like asked me for my order over her.
Oh.
And I said, oh, no, she was here first. And the barista was like, oh my God, miss, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. What would you like? And for whatever reason, that was the moment that all those other things that people had been telling me cascaded in. And it's this surreal, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, where you hear the final thing you need to hear or see, and then you just go back to all these inflection points that were all of these other opportunities that you could have learned that. And for me, like at 20, I felt terrible. For months, I felt terrible. Now I'm in my 40s. The last one I had was 2 years ago. And now I'm a lot more like forgiving of myself for it. Like I'm curious, I do my best. And when those moments happen, I make amends. I take accountability if I need to, where I can. But people change, and people, if you let them, they change for the better.
Yeah. And that's the healthy way to do it, right? But we're not taught that healthy way.
Well, no, and it's so hard because there's so many people doing so much to hurt people.
Yeah.
And so I don't really expect like a trans person to be forgiving at a cis person who's being kind of crap about trans stuff, right? They're being victimized. But another cis person being like that unforgiving for someone who held that view when they changed their mind, I think that's cruel. Like if you're over 25 and you've never changed your mind, you're doing it wrong.
That's growing up.
If you do it right.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about the American Masculinity podcast.
Yeah. So remember how earlier on I was like, yeah, as an individual therapist, we only get to see one story at a time. Well, I'm pretty popular in my area, and there's a lot of guys that I have to say no to that try to come in. Because in the counseling field, 4 out of 5 clinicians are women. And so there just aren't a lot of people that are masculine that are in the space. And all the data we have on counseling is you tend to have a better experience if the person sitting across from you looks like you. Right? That's just across the board. Doesn't matter who you are. And so I got kind of tired of those guys not having a resource. And the conversation has shifted around masculinity. Up until very recently, if someone was publicly speaking about masculinity and helping guys out, they were pretty men's rightsy and often veered into blaming women for all the ills of men, which is, garbage. And it's been nice because now there's more and more voices for guys saying, hey, no, like men are struggling. And yes, women and trans and non-binary people are struggling. We absolutely should be addressing that. But did you notice that only 1 in 3 college students are boys? Did you notice that boys are twice as likely to be expelled for the same offense as girls in school? Did you notice now that we've kind of leveled the playing field of school, that boys who need activity to learn are falling behind because schools don't provide activity?
Very true.
And so those conversations are now happening and they're very important. And I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to bring that expertise. And I think I have a unique background for it. I've got numerous allyship awards. I've worked on interpersonal violence for a large part of my career. And I've spent the last, almost 10 years working almost exclusively with men on men's issues. And so the podcast is a space for a more nuanced conversation about the topics where I get to, it's kind of fun for me because I get to geek a little bit, right? I get to find very smart people and very dedicated people to their thing and bother them for answers about the thing, which is the best. It's the absolute best, right? And it's been really lovely. The episode that released 2 weeks ago, I'm really proud of. I was able to find a Black Lives Matter advocate to come on, and we talked about what white guys need to know. And I'm out in Denver. There's not a lot of opportunity to have a black friend. I've got one. I'm not bothering him with this. He's got a lot of white guys bothering him for this. He doesn't need it from me, right? And so Martin came on and we had this great conversation, and he was honest, but he was very direct, and it was lovely. And I got to ask like curious questions of like, hey, when I do this, how bad is that? Right? How
We
can
all
I
want
do
to
better?
know.
Right.
Yeah.
But you just don't have an opportunity. Most of us have friends that look like us. That's just kind of how we organize in most places. And so I'm really excited to kind of bring those conversations forward and provide them for people. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I feel like the podcast for me really connects me with not just like-minded people, but diverse people. For me, I myself have religious trauma, and I tend to have people on that talk about religious trauma. But I also do have people on that talk about their faith.
Yeah.
And I believe that faith is extremely important for our mental health. Having faith in something.
It really is. It's really unfortunate for me since I don't have it. It annoys me. But by all metrics, if you have religion, you live a happier life on average by a significant amount.
I'm not religious, but I do have my ideas of what is a part of our universe. I guess you could call it spirituality, but there are, and in the times that I didn't have faith, those times were the lowest for me.
Yeah, they get dark.
Yeah.
They get dark. I think it's hard to sit in the existential dread of all we have is what we see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it just doesn't make sense. I don't know. I think to be an atheist, you got to work really hard at that to prove a negative, right?
Yeah. I think proving the negative is always the hardest thing to do.
Some would say impossible.
Mm.
Well, and I think we're of an age, and so in the 90s and 2000s, to be an atheist meant you were bothering people, right? These were the guys that were like, no, let me tell you why your faith is stupid. And I've just never been that angry about it, so it just didn't work. So agnosticism works really well for me, of like, look, I don't have the ego to think I understand whatever it is. I just know something's there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
It can make the difference in your life, especially if you're in a depression.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to be honest, for me, it helps me celebrate the good times. It's a lot easier to see the bigger light in the world when your life is going well. And you need to see the light while it's there, because eventually it's not going to be. And you're going to need to remember it to get back to it.
Yeah. Very, very true. Well, Tim, where can we find you?
You can find me at AmericanMasculinity.com. Keep it pretty easy. And I will give you a link. I found one of those little link tree things where it's one link that lists all my stuff. So
yes.
And then I'll take you to the podcast if you want the podcast. I also have developed out some free tools for guys that can't get to therapy. They won't replace therapy. I want to be really clear. Like, you need a clinician for clinician things, but you can also generally make your life a little bit better with some simple things sometimes. And so that's what those are. And then if you're in Colorado and you need some counseling and you're a guy, or you have a loved one that's a guy that you're looking to send somewhere, my counseling services are listed there as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Tim, for coming on the show. This was such a great conversation.
Of course. Thanks so much for doing what you do and bringing so much joy into the world.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the podcast. This show is produced by Phoenix Freed LLC, and I'm your producer, Jen Ginty. We hope you found today's conversation inspiring. Okay. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the podcast. This show is produced by Phoenix Freed LLC, and I'm your producer, Jen Ginty. We hope you found today's conversation insightful and inspiring. If you have a story of your own about when a not yet moment became right now, we encourage you to reach out and share it. You can find more information about being a guest on our show at whennotYetBecomesRightNow.com. Remember, you are not alone on your journey, whether it's a journey of healing, growth, or transformation. Every story matters. Thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next time with another inspiring episode.